known as the national monologue, because it's seen as being another mechanism by which the ANC can hoodwink the nation. Because at the moment we do not have a level playing field. We have insiders and outsiders, we have cronies, we have people who are never going to get access to any deals because they don't know the right people. I mean, even
how quickly things change, and South Africa has seen dramatic change in the last year, not least of which has been around an area that the government always used to put their worst ministers. The ANC always used to play this practical joke on South Africa by making our ministers of trade and industry the people least inclined towards trade and industry. We had Ibrahim Patel telling us what shoes we must wear, what chicken we must buy. We had Rob Davies and Alec Irwin, those leather patch wearing old commie university professors running trade and industry. Little wonder that trade and industry became a backwater. Roll forward to the Donald Trump era and South Africa's trade and industry really being imperiled by tariffs, and suddenly it's become a place of enormous interest, run by a failed mayor from Johannesburg, Parks Tau. And joining me today is the DA spokesman for Trade, Industry and Competition, Toby Chance. Toby, have I missed anything in my introduction? Scathing enough for you?
Well, that's your interpretation. We can certainly discuss the details. Thanks,
yeah,
Mike.
there's a lot to discuss, because suddenly South Africa gives a damn about trade and industry after years treating it as if it was a stepchild and just something that happens by divine right. Along come the US tariffs, and we realize, oh hell, hang on, let's actually take this a little bit seriously. And I think in no short measure, thanks to the Government of National Unity and some of the efforts of the Democratic Alliance. This episode of The State of the Nation has been brought to you by Pace Car Rental. We would like to thank Pace Car Rental for sponsoring us, and we want you to support them by hiring your next car through Pace. Go to their website, the address is here below, use the code SONA, S-O-N-A, to get a discount. And now back to the show. Democratic Alliance.
Yes, trade and industry and competition, as it is now known, of course, has been somewhat obscure to most voters because things have just gone along.
Yeah.
We've taken our trade relationships for granted, generally speaking.
You could almost say abusive.
Well, I think that our relationships have been troubled in some instances, but I think more generally speaking, if you look at the range of trade relations that we have, we trade with probably 150 countries, which is a lot of countries, and the tariffs that President Trump has imposed on South Africa has raised awareness dramatically of South Africa's dependency on trade. And we are a relatively open economy, by which I mean a considerable portion, about 30 to 40% of our GDP is dependent upon trade. And so those trade relations are critically important. And so we have to preserve them and nurture them as best we can.
And it's true testimony to the fact that clearly the DA has been asking some very awkward questions with the disgraceful firing of Andrew Whitfield, where, on a technicality, the president doesn't reply to requests for days and days and days, and then fires the guy 2 months after he travels. Clearly, that's not the reason that he fired him. It doesn't take a brain surgeon to work out that he must have fired him because he was uncomfortable, or certainly people within trade and industry and competition must have been uncomfortable with the work Andrew Whitfield was doing.
I don't think that's categorically true. I don't think we actually really know the reason that President Ramaphosa fired Andrew Whitfield. His stated reason is that he traveled overseas without permission. But Andrew was doing good work in the department. He was working on a lot of different areas. One of the things that came out of his actions was the omnibus bill, which is in process, and the omnibus bill is designed to reduce red tape and regulatory burdens across various departments. That's an important thing. He was looking at what was needed to streamline the technical institutions like the SABS and institutions that control our technical standards. He was also working on quite a few trade relations in other countries, Italy, Czechoslovakia, So, the work that Andrew was doing was not so much in the public eye, but it was important. Not to say that he didn't disagree with certain things that the department was working on, including, for example, the sector code for the legal sector code, which imposed severe restrictions on large companies in the legal fraternity BE codes, which I think he objected to. And I'm sure he voiced his opinion on the issue of American trade. But for whatever reason, he was fired. And John Steenhuisen took exception to that, and the party made some decisions resulting from that, which included the withdrawal of support for the national dialogue and a decision not to support the budgets of corrupt ministers. Because our view is that if you're going to fire a deputy minister for a very minor infraction or infringement, what about all the other people in the cabinet that are guilty of much greater crimes?
Yeah, well, John Steenhuisen said he was going to withhold support for budgets from corrupt ministers, but he ended up settling for one.
Yes,
who wasn't so much corrupt as she was incompetent. The corrupt ministers still survive.
Well, I don't think you could say that Mkhwebane wasn't corrupt. I mean, she had appointed a whole bunch of her cronies,
yes,
including family members of friends and cabinet ministers. And to my mind, that's corruption. It's maladministration as well as corruption. But the point is, she fell on a sword eventually. Well, she was fired, absolutely. But I mean, it doesn't stop there. And the DA is going to continue in its quest to root out corruption wherever we find it. And now you can see what Dean McPherson is doing with the IDT. He's laid criminal charges against the acting or the former CEO, the suspended CEO. And wherever we find, I know that Leon Schreiber, in his first few months of office, he fired 20 or 30 officials that were found to be corrupt. So it's a major issue for us in the DA that we've got to root out corruption in government wherever we find it.
Yeah. Now you look, a lot of your focus, you are the spokesperson for the DA on trade, industry and competition. And there's been a lot going on. I mean, I mentioned Parks Tower as one of the many failed mayors of Johannesburg, and I'll stand by that because his record relative to a complete waste of time like Dada Moreira looks stellar. But I lived through Johannesburg under Parks Tower, and, the rot set in. To be fair to him, prior to him, he just did nothing to arrest it. So, he hardly had winner written all over him. He has tried, he has seemed to be energetic. But suddenly, and I presume it's in no short measure to the work that the DA has been done, there's all sorts of question marks coming out of this department. And let's deal with some of the doozies.
Yeah.
There was the Lotto license, and surprise, surprise, the vice president wins the Lotto. It's fantastic. Well done, Paul Mashatile.
Yeah, no, the Lotto has been a long-running sore for the ANC ever since it started, because it's been hugely contested. All of the bidders for the Lotto have one political connection or other with the ANC. So it's a matter of which faction do you support or don't you. And I think what happened was that Minister Tower was caught short when the adjudication committee and the evaluation committee recommended a company that had a shareholder, who was an MP and a major funder through the Batapali Trust of the ANC. And then he decided to appoint Sizikaya Holdings without apparently knowing that an indirect shareholder was the deputy president's sister-in-law. So it is a problem, and I think that what we have to insist on now is that Minister Tower does reveal his record of decision. Some of that has come out in the court papers that have been submitted, because he has been taken to court by Tuba and other losing bidders for his decision. But we have put in a PIRE and a PIRE application, and what that is going to now hopefully reveal is the names of the evaluation committee members, and all the correspondence and the information that was shared between them and the National Lottery Commission, as well as the minister, as to why they made the decision that they did. And hopefully it'll come out in the wash. It's possible that the court might throw out the decision to appoint Sizikaya. They may find that the decision, was irrational. One of the objections is that Sizikaya doesn't have the requisite finances in place to to launch the Lotto. We don't know that for certain, because everything is, smoke and mirrors, and it's sort of cloaked in a lot of bureaucraties.
Yes.
So we'll have to wait and see. The court date hasn't been set yet, but once it has been set, I'm sure that the public interest is going to be enormous.
Yeah, well, it certainly will. But in the meantime, the lottery carries on with the previous people running the lottery that were meant to be gone 2 years ago.
Well, yes, their term was extended by Ibrahim Patel, mainly because of COVID. They were claiming that they had major losses during COVID because people weren't buying Lotto tickets. So Ituba is still running the Lotto, and there have been some hitches because they had to hand over certain systems, and the systems weren't necessarily working in all cases. But the deadline is approaching, and by the end of May next year, the new operator has to be in place.
Toby, before we move on to some of the other, linked with that has been this epidemic. In a country with some of the social problems that we have, gambling is a huge issue. And one can't move anywhere without seeing a million adverts for gambling companies. One has to ask, what gives? Should there not be some sort of social conscience on behalf of the so-called movement, that's meant to speak for the people, that's given birth to $1 trillion rand industry, built on the misery of South Africans who don't understand maths?
Yeah, gambling has become a big problem. When I say that, what I mean is that a lot of people that are not well off at all are spending their meager income, if they have an income, on gambling, with the hope that they're going to either win big or pay off some debt or put some bread on the table the next day. So the actual numbers are that the gambling industry the gross gambling revenue is in the region of 60 billion. The 1 trillion rand that you're referring to is the bets, including rollover bets that are placed. But the actual income is around about 60 billion, which is a large amount of money. And the explosion in online gambling is really what is driving that. It's now twice the size of the income from casinos. And the issue has been taken up politically and also by institutions like the Responsible Gambling Foundation. I met with them the other day, who are dealing with increasingly large numbers of people who are phoning in to seek help, because gambling is addictive. And like any other substance that is addictive, it produces very negative consequences to your psyche and your social relations and your family affairs and so on. So in Parliament, we are looking at this very carefully, and the problem is that the 2008 National Gambling Amendment Act has never been promulgated, and that was the act that attempted to deal with interactive gambling, what is sometimes called remote gambling or online gambling. And that is a problem because it's meant that all the regulations that should have been put in place haven't been. So there has been an explosion, and what is happening is that the provincial regulators are now taking charge, which they should be doing anyway, because they're where the regulation takes place or the licensing takes place. But there are no norms and standards, and one of the big problems is advertising. There's been a massive explosion of advertising, and as you say, every corner you travel in your car, you see a huge billboard on TV, radio, wherever you go.
Team, all of our major competitions.
Exactly, and so many of our competitions are now sponsored by the gambling companies, the Betway and the Hollywood Bets. We're not saying that this should be banned, but what we're saying is that there's got to be greater regulation. For example, the time of day when these adverts are flighted, the positioning of the adverts, the sort of things that they can say. There's this rather weak strapline, winners know when to stop. I mean, I think that's rather hackneyed now, because
winners do, losers don't.
Well, I'm not so sure that winners know when to stop. And just because you're a winner doesn't mean to say that you're not psychologically affected negatively by gambling. So, I don't want to say that gambling is a vice. Unfortunately, gambling is something which has got a proclivity to attract people who are potentially susceptible to these things and are not able to deal with the psychological consequences. So we have to look at it very carefully. And I have been speaking to the provincial gambling boards. I've been speaking to the gambling companies as well as the minister himself. The department is supposedly amending the current act, but they're overburdened, and so there's a possibility that we may take the bill into committee and combine what is provided in the remote gambling bill, which is my private member's bill, and other submissions that have come from the public to put in place a comprehensive response to the public demand for regulation of gambling, which is important.
But we understand that the minister is very busy. He's got a lot on his plate, and the thing that seemed to immediately fall onto his plate the minute he got into the job was to establish a 100 billion rand empowerment fund. Now, just doing some simple maths, the empowerment fund, as I understand it, the idea behind it is that he's going to make 100 billion rand available willy-nilly for black business people, as if that's the problem. Now, one just has to do the sums and, let's be generous here and say at least 60% of entrepreneurs failed. It's probably closer to 90. You're immediately throwing away 60 billion rand, isn't it? I mean, that's why banks don't just give money to every entrepreneur that wants it.
Yes, and it would be foolish to say that funding, or the lack of that funding, is the main cause of business failure. The Transformation Fund, as it's called, which is due to be managed through the National Empowerment Fund, is a huge undertaking, and we have been critical of it in the DA for lots of reasons. Number one, it's couched in terms of the BBBEE Act, which we don't approve of anyway, because we don't believe in race-based assessment of need or of opportunity. That's the first objection. The second objection is that there are many publicly funded institutions, such as the Small Enterprise Development Finance Agency, the NEF itself, the IDC, the National Youth Development Agency, and I could go on, that have been dishing out billions of rands over the years, and most of it, not most of it, but a large amount of it is never paid back. So that means that the businesses either are failing to pay their loans, or they are refusing to pay their loans, and so there's a whole problem of litigation between these institutions and the companies that are borrowing the money. And then you have the fact that the banks, understandably, are protecting their depositors' money, so they don't want to hand over money that doesn't belong to them to businesses that may or may not pay it back. So there is a risk factor. And the long and short of it is that funding has to be combined with more hands-on interventions to help these businesses survive and grow, access markets, train their staff, produce quality products, all the things that a functioning business ordinarily does. But because of the apartheid past and the years of exclusion, we have many budding entrepreneurs who simply don't have the wherewithal to do what they want to do. They have the ambition and the vision, but they don't have the means. And I think that the concept of providing a combination of state money and private sector money to fill that gap is in itself not a bad idea. It's just that how do you go about it? And the plan was is to take the 3% of net profit after tax that are already set aside by businesses as part of their scorecard contributions and put it into an aggregated fund, which will then be spent centrally, and that in itself is problematic for all the reasons we know. I mean, it's like an SMME version of the NHI.
Yeah.
We do not want another massive fund of money.
Yeah, and it's another COVID 2.0.
It's another one of those. So there's a lot of argy-bargy around this, and I think what's happened is that since the concept document was published in February, submissions have been sent in by the DA, amongst others, and I think the department is cogitating these, and I very much hope that they won't just throw them in the dustbin and actually think about what they're saying, because a lot of criticism has come from organized business. BLSA, BUSA, Chambers of Commerce have all had their comments to make, and many of them have been constructive in principle, but critical of the detail. So we're going to be keeping an eye on that very closely in the committee, and certainly as the DA.
Now, yeah, I had Busi Mavuso from Business Leadership South Africa, and she also seemed to fail to understand that because she's never worked in small business, she's only ever worked in corporate and for organizations like BLSA, seemed to be completely at sea with the idea that what the biggest problem for entrepreneurs is not necessarily funding but regulation. Is there, in your experience, anybody in government that understands that the problem is not necessarily funding but government?
Well, I mentioned Andrew and his omnibus bill, which is an indication that there are, but they don't necessarily reside within the ANC.
Yeah, and they don't last.
Well, we'll see. But the point is, the pressure is on, because the fact is that the numbers are telling. The numbers are showing that growth has not changed much in the last 12 months. Unemployment is still going up. Businesses are not investing. They're closing down. So, that's why John on Monday led this, turbocharging growth press conference where we outlined the 6 points, because something has to change and we cannot just carry on like this. So the point about the omnibus bill is it's not just about reforming legislation within the DTIC family. It's reforming legislation across government. So, for example, this doesn't necessarily come into the omnibus bill, but the employment equity quotas is another piece of madness. The idea that you can run a business on the basis of government-imposed quotas of one race or another in your labor force. But to get there, we first have to get the ANC to understand that they're no longer in charge on their own, and they've got to listen to what other people are saying, and listen to the markets. The markets are telling them that change is required. So there's got to be more robust discussion in cabinet, and as elections come along, I think minds are going to be concentrated.
Yeah, and we're going to get to John's speech in a minute, because I thought a lot of good stuff came out of it. But on that point, it was Professor Susan Boyson from the Mapungubwe Institute this week that said that the problem seems to be that the ANC haven't come to terms with the fact that they don't have a majority, and they're still governing as if they do, which is creating problems of its own.
Well, it is, and I think that's one of the reasons why more and more organizations are withdrawing from the national dialogue, which is now known as the national monologue.
Yeah.
Because it's seen as being another mechanism by which the ANC can hoodwink the nation, pretending to be consulting the nation when it's not.
And looking like they're in charge.
Well, you see, the ANC doesn't like not to be in charge. If the ANC is not in charge, then it walks away. So President Ramaphosa and the cabinet have essentially taken over this process. Or attempted to, but the results are evident that tomorrow when the National Convention convenes, there's going to be large numbers of people who should be there who are not there. And remember, the DA did sign up to this initially because it was a civil society-led process, long in the gestation. Not ideal. I mean, our view is that we have a national dialogue every 5 years, and that's called an election. And we have institutions such as Parliament, where the representatives come together and they can, argue out what needs to happen. And that still is our view. But, if there is a national dialogue, it has to be run along principles that are not defined by the ANC's own interests.
Yeah. So, now we move on to just one of the questions before we get into the DA's position, turbocharging growth. Is there ever any talk about formalizing informal business? This seems to be the holy cow that cannot be touched in South Africa. We've had recently the big discussion and debate brought on by Gerrie Fourie, the CEO of Capitec, saying the real unemployment rate, if one used measures as used by countries similar to us, would be around 10%. And that being that many people that work informally are counted as being unemployed. We've got, according to people like Gigi Alcock, thriving, informal economies and township economies that aren't in the net. Is there any appetite for ever formalizing these businesses?
Well, you've got to remember that the only person that can formalize a business is the owner of that business. And that person who is running the business has to be incentivized to do so.
Yes.
If they're not going to be incentivized, they're not going to do it. So the idea that you can just go in there and wave a wand and all of a sudden these businesses will formalize is a myth.
Mm.
And again, it's a sort of pathology of a mindset which says that the state can achieve anything, but it can't. The state has to provide an environment that is conducive for people to do business. Mm. And the fact that so many businesses are informal means that the conditions are not conducive to formalizing. Mm. So what does it mean to formalize? Well, it means to have a business bank account. It means to keep a set of accounts. It means probably to have a business registration number, a SARS number, a UIF number, all the things that most businesses that are regarded as formal have. But for some reason,
And then to pay tax.
And then to pay tax, exactly. So that is what has got to happen in order for businesses to be incentivized to formalize. So our view in the DA is that we mustn't glamorize the informal sector. There are some people, including, I fear, Gigi Alcock, who do tend to glamorize the informal sector. In other words, they say that all these millions of people hustling and doing business, which is fair enough. But a lot of those people would actually rather have a job, number one. Somebody else employing them rather than employing themselves. And number two, the incomes of these businesses are in many cases very, very small. The conditions in which they're operating are often appalling. The state of infrastructure, crime, just general neglect in the township and rural areas is dreadful because municipalities are failing in their jobs of providing basic services. So if you are going to have an informal business, you want it to be in an environment that is itself safe and clean and accessible, and those things are often not in place. So it starts with the municipalities actually doing those things properly, and then what it does, what it requires, is businesses to realize that in order to get access to formal markets, they have to have the things that formal customers, businesses require, which is proper registration. They have to be able to deliver on time. They have to be able to provide a proper invoice. They have to, these sorts of things. And I know that there's a great deal of effort being made in the informal economy to provide those back-end systems, simple accounts, methods of recording information that then can enable you, for example, to get a loan based upon your turnover rather than on your assets. Because one of the things that banks generally do is that they require collateral for a loan. Most of these businesses don't have any collateral. They either don't have title to their house or they don't have any assets. So there are processes underway which enable financiers to look at a person's 6-month sales and then say, okay, we can lend you X. But if there's no record of those sales, they can't lend the money. So it's a long process, and I think that it's gradually happening. But I think it's going to take everybody's effort in the township. So, for example, tomorrow, I'm going to an event organized by an organization called Boundless in partnership with the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which is an access to funding or a matching funding exercise in Orlando. In Diepkloof, which is another attempt by formal business to go in there and start to accelerate the process by which businesses who need funding and other things, as I said earlier, not just funding, can access it on reasonable terms, by which I mean not machinista terms of 30% interest, sometimes a month, let alone a year. So it's got to be affordable finance. And affordable finance should also be a combination of funding instruments, including grants, equity, and loans. And this is something which, again, hasn't been properly explored. Because if you think about most businesses, when they start, they don't start on the basis of a loan. They can't afford to pay the loan back. They scratch around for a bit of money from maybe some savings or some family. And that's what probably has to be focused on initially in the township environment, is providing that initial bit of working capital to get those businesses started, but not just forget about them, because then they may not be able to pay it back, or they may not be able to grow or employ 3 or 4 people. But if we did have another 500,000 businesses, each of which were employing 2 or 3 people, we would, reduce unemployment by a third. So it's very important, and I think John made the point on Monday that stimulating entrepreneurship has to be a major part of any economic policy in this country.
Yeah. So let's dive into a little bit of what John said, because a lot of it was around the economy. That was really the gist of what he's talking about. It's 6 major areas, starting off with the one that's now joined in the national conversation, and that is our race-based obsession.
Yeah.
These exclusionary laws, very reminiscent of apartheid legislation, very, very unpopular internationally, not just with the US. Everybody makes a big deal about the US. I think the biggest problem are the countries where they smile and say, oh, okay, but then they don't invest.
Right.
At least Donald Trump is showing his hand and saying, we're not going to trade with you while you've got this. But I don't see massive Chinese or Indian investment while you have these crazy laws. So the race-based laws, the scrapping of BEE and employment equity as they currently have, are we just whistling in the wind with that? Do you think that anybody's listening?
Yes, I do think people are listening. And it's interesting, in the last 6 to 9 months, the debate has shifted quite dramatically. In other words, it's now acceptable to question BEE, even if you're not, let's say a member of the white elite, who are the people that have been accused of maintaining privilege at the expense of the majority. But actually what has happened now is that people have examined the consequences of BEE, and they've said, well, if BEE had been so successful, why do we have 0% growth virtually, 32% unemployment, and so on and so on?
Rising unemployment.
So we have to have a root and branch review of all the policies that are either incentivizing or disincentivizing people to start and grow a business. And that includes BEE. So it's something which the ANC is hanging on to for dear life, because it's essentially the source of their patronage network. And organizations such as the Progressive Business Forum, which is their fundraising entity that basically circulates money between tenderpreneurs, BEE beneficiaries, and the ANC, has been their route to power. And the prospect of losing that is a major threat to the ANC. So there is going to be resistance, but I think that pressure needs to be put on institutions. We mentioned BLSA, BUSA, also the BEE Commission. Obviously, the BEE Commission has a vested interest in there being BEE. Without it, it wouldn't exist. But it's not to say that there shouldn't be redress. And as the DA, what we're saying is that we need to measure redress, by which we mean compensation for past inequalities on the basis of need, rather than on the basis of race.
Of course, the biggest redress by far would be economic growth.
Precisely, yes.
Right, that's where the real redress happens. Just give more opportunities. Let's kill this disgusting, despicable unemployment rate.
Yeah, and also a very important point is create a level playing field, Mike, because at the moment we do not have a level playing field. We have insiders and outsiders. We have cronies. We have people who are never going to get access to any deals because they don't know the right people. I mean, even as basic as the EPWP, the Expanded Public Works Program, if you don't have a relationship with the ANC councillor, you're not going to get that job. So that is, it goes to the very heart of what is wrong with this country, which is why the DA's Open Opportunities Society for all is so crucial, as opposed to a closed crony society for the few. Yes. That's the important message that needs to get across.
And we even saw the EPWP scam in this thing that's emerged with the IDT CEO.
That's right.
Where it's run as a business, a well-connected cadre, tenderpreneur business. Then the next thing that John mentioned, and is obviously something to just sort of marvel at that, in 2021, we had our Minister of Transport, and I had his spokesman on here. That was the then Minister of Transport, Fikile Mbalula, also known as the court jester, literally watching live on television as our rail infrastructure was being carted away. And I asked her, his former spokesman, what did he do? She said, we were very shocked. We were very shocked, and then we did afterwards go lay a charge at the police station. But now we have to put Humpty Dumpty back together again, because our transport networks have been decimated.
They have. I don't know whether you noticed last week, my colleague in Parliament, Taimi Mbabena, who's our Deputy Transport Spokesman, went to the Johannesburg depot, the railway depot, and revealed unbelievable amounts of destruction of the railway carriages and the locomotives that are just sitting there. Spent billions of rands on these machines that are being left to rot. And unfortunately, one of Mbabula's worst decisions was to fire the security company during COVID. And so that meant that basically it was a thief's paradise. Everything from signaling equipment to railways to you name it was just stolen. And that's led to a collapse in our railway infrastructure. So now the network industry is absolutely an important feature, which obviously includes Transnet, but it also includes the road networks and digital communications. And
it's not like they've replaced him with a much better minister. We now have Barbara Creasy, and she seems to be doing absolutely nothing, and there's more corruption looming with her regulator.
Yeah, look, she has replaced some boards, and I think some of those board members are a bit suspect, so she's having to have another look at that.
Yeah. Is there any sign that she's not as corrupt as everybody else?
I don't think she's corrupt. But I mean, who am I to say? I think that she's. I think that of all the ministers, I think that she's one of them that has her heart in the right place, and I think she's doing her best. But that's maybe not good enough.
Okay. Well, on your judgment, okay, the electricity. Here we're getting completely mixed signals. I know John spoke about the need for electricity. I don't think a lot of South Africans understand that with our current electricity grid, we cannot have economic growth. If we had to suddenly get economic growth from heaven somewhere, the lights would go out. Now, recently we had the junior court jester, Josienso Ramagopa, saying, we're doing very well. At the same time, figures emerge that we've used more diesel this year than last year to keep the open gas turbines running.
Yeah.
Open cycle gas turbines. So somebody's lying. Either the numbers are lying and somebody's stealing a massive amount of diesel, good chance, or he's lying and the electricity grid is not in such wonderful condition.
Yeah, the energy availability factor has been a serious problem. It's been sort of hovering around the 50 to 60%. It's now sort of creeping up above the 60%, apparently. Anything above that, we're starting to create a reasonable margin. But that's got to be the focus. It's got to be and I think Eskom, to its credit, has decided to work with OEMs, suppliers of the original equipment, not middlemen, which means that A, they're paying less, and B, they're getting the people that know what they're talking about in fixing the equipment. But I think more importantly, that the energy system, the energy generation, transmission, distribution system has still not yet been properly reformed. I mean, the ISMO bill, independent systems operator, has been in the pipeline for years, and it still hasn't been operationalized. And the problem is that the ANC still wants government to be in control. So that means that Eskom is going to remain under state control, and as will the transmission network. Now, an unregulated or a lightly regulated energy system would involve multiple producers of electricity competing with each other, and then the regulator buying electricity from the cheapest supplier or the most sustainable supplier, and then transmitting it through the network and then handing it over to the distributors in towns and cities. That hasn't happened yet. It's a very, very long and tedious process which needs to be accelerated. So that was one of the reasons why John singled it out, because without energy, reliable energy, and also well-priced energy. We just can't compete as a nation.
And any sign of Eskom being allowed to buy their own diesel? It's still
not yet.
being built.
Not that I can see.
Yeah, just for those that don't know, Minister of Mineral Resources, the one and only Gwede Mantashe, stand-up guy, won't allow Eskom to buy their own diesel. They have to buy it through middlemen. It's a very opaque and nobody knows what price they're paying, but all we know is that you're probably getting diesel at the pump cheaper than what Eskom is buying in bulk.
It's a racket, no question.
Yeah. You then, John, spoke about investing in growth, productive industries. Explain that a little more.
Well, if you look at government expenditure, something like 60% of government expenditure is paying salaries. I may be wrong on that in the detail, but the fact is that way too much of our tax money is spent on paying government employees, many of whom are earning enormous salaries and doing very little. So that's unproductive expenditure, and we need to refocus it on productive expenditure, which is capital assets, which can generate growth. So if you look at economics term called gross fixed capital expenditure, is only about 13 to 14% of GDP at the moment. It needs to be a minimum of 25%. And that means that we've got to divert our economic resources away from unproductive employees, reduce the state wage bill, basically, and put it into infrastructure. And to the credit of my colleague, Ashwal Sarupan, the Deputy Finance Minister, he has been a major force in leading towards that end within the medium-term financial planning, and the budget is now looking at increasing expenditure on infrastructure, which is a good thing. And that's what we mean by spending for growth.
Yeah, the person who does a wonderful sort of analysis of that has been Moletsi Mbeki, comparing South Africa with other middle-income countries or countries comparable to us, and our government sector wage bill is about double what countries like ours.
Yeah, it's way too high, and again, it's been a way of the ANC, has been doing it to shore up its electoral base, and many of our middle class people in this country are not productive employees of businesses, but actually employees of the state.
Yeah.
So that is a problem.
And many of them, like the Minister of Police, sit at home and get paid, which is a beautiful thing. Municipalities, absolute mess. I don't know if there's anything one can say other than, my Lord.
Well, it has.
Why do people keep on voting for?
It has to start with employing the right people in those jobs. Yeah. And unfortunately, and even the ANC has admitted that they've messed up there. They've appointed the wrong people. They don't know what they're doing. And they have just let municipalities decline to a shocking state. So it's a very important, and I think Treasury is mindful of this for lots of reasons. Number one, not necessarily in order of importance, they owe Eskom about 100 billion rand, which is a problem because it means that Eskom can't pay its debt. Number two, municipalities are a source of economic growth, because without functioning municipalities, you won't have businesses investing. Number three, much of the municipal income comes from Treasury in the equitable share, and much of that money isn't spent properly. So Treasury has to make sure that it's spent properly instead of being either not spent or wasted or sent back to Treasury. So it's a big problem, and I know that Operation Vulnerella is turning its attention to fixing the municipalities, and it's a maja problem, and it's got to be fixed.
And we even saw shock horror, the Minister of Finance, who seemed so incompetent around the budget, threatening the city of Johannesburg that he was going to withhold funding because of their accounting.
So hard talk is going to be the order of the day, I think, from now on.
And of course, the last point that was part of that DA address was crime. Now, we did have the spectacle of a real president of a country going to the White House and telling the president of the biggest country, one of the most important countries in the world, that we have got no handle on crime. Don't worry about a white genocide, we're killing everybody. Basically the gist of what he had to say.
Yeah, I think that he was a bit blindsided by Trump's approach in the White House. But true to say, he did admit we have a crime problem, and as did John Steenhuisen.
He's white agricultural minister.
Yeah, he's agricultural minister.
Yeah,
but
not according to our president.
Anyway. Well, anyway, the fact is that, the president made the point about that, but the issue here is not just crime against white people, it's crime generally. And as John pointed out, by further, the biggest victims of crime are poor black people. So crime is a big problem, particularly in the townships and the rural area. I mean, only yesterday we saw a car being torched in the Moponia Mall and 2 people being killed. One was the Uber driver and another one was shot by a stray bullet, and who's going to be reprimanding, capturing, let alone trying and convicting the criminals? Well, we don't know, because that is a big problem, and our police services have collapsed.
And that rounds us off smartly to crime, which is now absolutely in the spotlight, thanks to the revelations by Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi and our president's hasty, bullet-like reactions a week later to set up a commission of inquiry.
Yes, I think that he's gone the easy route. I think that it's advantageous that we have a parliamentary committee that has been set up, ad hoc committee, which is running in parallel.
But headed by the ANC.
Well, yes, it is, because they are the chairs. But I think that you have some strong, members of other parties. So, for example, you have Ian Cameron, who's the chairman of the police portfolio committee. He's certainly not going to be taking any fools. And so I think that is going to be very interesting to see whether Parliament does its job. The Commission does have significant powers, and the former Deputy Chief Justice has I think, come out quite strongly in his determination to get to the bottom of this. The problem is going to be whether people are prepared to come forward and tell the truth, because there's so many accusations and counter-accusations and people fearing for their lives. Just dealing with the issue of the allegations of Lieutenant General Mkhwanazi themselves is not going to cut it. It has to go way beyond that, into a fundamental reform of the way police operates, not just the police, but the criminal justice system. And it has to also look at whether the current prosecuting authority is able to do its job with its effectively reporting to the Minister of Justice. And my colleague Glynis Breitenbach's bill to establish a sort of Scorpions Mark II is an important part of what has to happen to get the criminals into jail.
I'd like to close off by asking you a question. It appears to every citizen of this country, not least of all the people that watch politics as closely as I do, that you've got this very strange situation where the ANC is trying desperately to get the DA to resign from the GNU, and the DA is tempting the ANC to fire them. What is the state of the GNU? How can it exist when people have such animosity towards one another? You're meant to be running the country together. And at what point does the DA start owning some of the failures of its GNU government?
It's not easy. Nobody can claim that it is. And I think that there are evident frustrations which have come to the fore publicly, not only by our ministers, but also by ANC ministers and other ministers. But I think it's a symptom of the fact that we're in totally new territory. As South Africa, we're in a territory which hasn't been trodden for 30 years, which is realizing that there are contesting political parties who disagree on fundamental things. And those are going to be arguments that have to be taken through a process before any form of consensus arrives. And the initiation of the GNU, took place rather precipitously because of the constitutional requirement. And it starts with the statement of intent being honored by all parties. And that means that there has to be proper transparency and acceptance by all parties that this is a coalition. It's not just one party leading the sheep behind it. And I think that's got to be the first point, that President Ramaphosa and his team have got to realize that this is a joint effort. And so disagreements will be always there, but we have to find a means of addressing them collectively, and agreeing on some and disagreeing on others. And sometimes you have to win battles and lose battles, but lose them and move on to the next. You can't win them all.
Well, Toby, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for answering the questions, and well done on the work that you're doing in trade and industry in somehow trying to break the cycle of, that particular, such a vital portfolio just not even being interested in trade or industry. It's as a South African, it's a bit heartening. But Toby Chance from the Democratic Alliance, thank you so much for joining us. To everybody that watched us, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you again on the State of the Nation. Every business needs a world-class video to show to your clients and prospective clients. When the StreamIn team isn't filming the State of the Nation, they are producing those world-class videos for companies just like yours. They have got all of the equipment, drones, microphones, whatever you need, and the technical know-how to film a proper video for your company. Visit their website.